So this course, as you know, is titled The Art of Failure. And I'm going to be hosting you for this weekend. I'm really looking forward to spending this time with you. Frankly, we're going to improvise a lot of this because it's a really unusual kind of a topic. I've sort of tried to get my arms around it a few times, each time realizing I'm not particularly getting it. But before we start, my name is Eli Zelkha, and I'm an adjunct professor here. I'm also a partner with Concepto Ventures. That's a venture fund out of Spain and London. I also have my close friend and partner in Concepto, Harry Baiba, here. Harry has been, and Harry also, prior to Concepto, had a senior finance position at Apple and has had really a terrific career. We also worked together when I ran strategy and new ventures at Tandem. Harry was head of corporate finance, so we did a lot of our deals as partners. Anyway, Harry's a complete and equal partner in the design of this course, in the generation of the slides, in everything. So if you see any problems, please, you know who's responsible for what we're speaking about. So failure, what a weird topic, and you really wonder, why would anyone want to study failure? Why did you sign up for this? I'm wondering.
Well, it's part of our whole program, but I definitely see the value in failing. I think that's how you learn.
I see.
Through failure.
I see. Great. Any other feelings? Why one would take a course like this? Yes.
If you can analyze why someone else failed, you can avoid their mistakes.
That's a really, really good point. Why go through it yourself if you can learn from others' failures? Excellent. When I first started looking at it, one of the things, I tend to be a visual person, so one of the things I did was, I don't know, you guys might be familiar with a website, what's it called? It's an LA gallery. In any case, it's Getty Images, right? And it's really, so whenever I have something new, a lot of times I'll just take that word or that title and I'll just throw it into the search engine at Getty Images and see what comes up. And I did it actually with the word failure. And I think you might find it kind of interesting what came up. First of all, guy just completely in free fall. This looks like a really happy guy. And, the look and feel of guilt and shame and, I guess, failure. Here you see a lot of sort of themes of the ocean. Here we have the ship sinking in all the way. A graphic treatment. I love these guys sort of sprawled out at the end following the disaster or failure, whatever it is. This guy literally going down the tubes. Again, the ocean theme, sort of drowning. Here's nice methodical corporate methodology to just going off the deep end. And I love this, the blame. You failed. You're responsible. And really my favorite, just a big, horrible scream. And we're all this child. And we all have this. A lot of times it's ourselves that's really destroying us with it. So it's obviously just such a heavy, loaded word to think about it. So let's move on from just failure to, what about the art of failure? And what do you see? What does the art of failure mean to some of you? Because frankly, to me, I kept thinking I had a hold of it, and I realized, no, I really didn't. When you think here, art of failure, what comes to mind? What do you think of?
When you are making mistakes or when you are failing, actually recognizing the things that you're doing, the tools that you're using, the techniques that you're using, the methods that you're using, recognizing which ones are causing the mistakes or causing the failure, and recognizing which ones are not causing the failure, and just seeing it as a whole.
That's a really good point, and I think one thing you did right here was you separated, there is the failure happening and there's you. These are two separate things rather than I am a failure or I failed. Hey, this event the outcome was failure. That's a really good point. What does it mean to you?
I think of it as doing the same thing or doing something the same way and expecting different results.
I see.
So
I thought that's insanity, but I guess it also applies to the art of failure.
so it calls for probably looking at, as Cameron pointed out, what you are doing and how you're doing it, and probably learning from it, and maybe turning a bad situation into a good one.
Cool. Any other thoughts on the topic? Yes.
I've been sort of like promoting the thinking of fast experimentation. Just get something out there and then try to improve it. Of course, that you can't do fast experimentation effectively without embracing failure, and then also that try to actually get learning from failure. But the learning, when we think about learning, we think about probably learning as a science. But learning from failure is just so hard. It's not a science yet. So I guess that it's an art.
That's really a good point. I'll tell you, I've been really struggling with it myself. Once I decided to do it, I started just thinking about art of failure, and you get hit with all kinds of things. First of all, there's all these, just do it, and all these wonderful quotes about experience it. And frankly, I looked at those, and they seemed to me like, get real. No, this is no, I'm not going to be risking my life, because of do it, or, some situation like that. So then I said, no, let's take a more serious business kind of a look at it. What is the art of failure? And I said, well, it's the art of resilience. So, and if we're doing it in a business, I started going down the path of turnarounds, understanding corporate or business or startup turnarounds. And frankly, I did that for a good stretch of my career, about 9-10 years. So I was going down that tube, and I said, no, it's about entrepreneurship. And also there's a key group participating in this class, the scouts that are going to, really frontier countries, emerging countries, and clearly they're looking at, much more early stage entrepreneurship, because that turnaround really started taking me down a corporate path. And I did corporate turnarounds, like public company turnarounds. So it seemed, frankly, we went down that path a little, sorry, Harry, and then we kind of wound back. Went down a path along, frankly, just the pure psychological, personal, some of the influence principles and, some motivational elements. And let's face it, motivational elements are really fundamental to art of failure. And then I said, look, I can't, I'm not going to be a Tony Robbins. I think he's a great motivational guy. And that's not the role of Monterey Institute, etc. So frankly, it's been a lot of false starts in trying to get an arm around it. And the fact is, it's all of those things and a lot more. And really, when I really, so this is one iteration, one approach to what the art of failure could be. And frankly, under other circumstances, we could have ended up with an entirely different kind of a course. But fundamentally, I really do see it as an experiment. This is the first time we're doing this course. I don't know if it's going to be successful or effective, etc. I'm hoping to learn from you guys what you really think, and I hope we definitely need your student reviews, etc., particularly for this, because we want to know whether we should continue it, we want to know how to modify it, and frankly, the approach I've taken towards it is, let's just throw a lot of cool, interesting experiences into there, and let's see what sticks. Beyond that, as was really pointed out, it's really also an attitude and a mindset. And, and I say, Yue mentioned, said really a key point, the whole concept of rapid iteration and experimentation and trial and error and a learning process. I don't know, these are some words I put in here. Frankly, it's not even a complete sentence, but I think you really get the feeling it's inquisitive and seeking, trying to discover something. It's fundamentally really a joyful, fun exercise because you're trying to figure out something. You're trying to understand something you didn't understand. it's strategic. You know, it's not caught up in the little weeds. You know, it's intelligently tries to, you know, how do you build innovative, successful entrepreneurial companies? It's really, really hard creating something people really want. And sort of doing it as an ongoing trial and error process, a learning process. So one thing it really is, and frankly in my selection of speakers and the experiences I want you to get, is just, you know, this whole attitude and mindset associated with it. And frankly, that's probably the single most important thing that could come out of it, because I think entrepreneurship is first and foremost, you know, a way of thinking, a certain drive, and a joy associated with that. But beyond that, it seemed like, you know, we really want to do some things that are really much more practical. And when you really look at this mindset, this approach to the world, guess what? There's a whole bunch of really cool, interesting methodologies, approaches, resources, tools that are emerging in Silicon Valley and globally, really. But Silicon Valley, as usual, is one of the earliest to adopt some of these methodologies and approaches. And these really reflect that psychology, that mentality, which we spoke about earlier. And, you know, so beyond, you know, an attitude, it's also, you know, a set of emerging approaches and methodologies. And these are really some of these core ideas, and we're going to touch on them in various ways. Some of these things we're going to barely touch on. But one thing which I think is so exciting is the whole concept of a super low-cost entry for a venture, where you can do a venture, not a little corner grocery store, but a venture that could potentially scale, you know, to a public company. But you can, you know, it's increasingly possible to do that, you know, on 10 grand or 20 grand or something, or even less. And, you know, and there's an awful lot of people thinking about that. I mean, to me, that is just a very, very exciting thing. Concepto Ventures, which we started about 7-8 months ago, is all about that concept. It's all about just pure, rapid experimentation, you know, to find something. And frankly, we found things which we have a customer, you know, someone wants to buy it, etc. But when you do so much experimentation, we're not even interested in developing that concept, because we found concepts which we feel are even more powerful, even more effective. And I'll come back to that. We'll discuss that. So this low entry cost ventures is one. And then there's some things that really apply directly to that mentality we spoke about. Steve Blank will be presenting shortly after I finish here at 10 o'clock in about a half an hour. And he's really the leading thinker and theoretician and someone who's really done a tremendous amount of work on this whole idea of customer discovery and customer development. I think it's incredibly important. You know, product development has always been, there's a lot of methodology, there's a lot of approaches. It's been viewed as there's somewhat of a science. But then market entry and, you know, customer development, etc. That's really always been sort of like once the product is developed, well, we'll hire a sales guy and then he'll go out and, you know, and what typically happens is then you fire that sales guy because he can't sell that thing. By the time you fired your third sales guy, you realize maybe the problem is more fundamental, etc. Anyway, Steve is like tops on this, and this is all about discovery, all about iteration. There's a whole agile development movement. And like with you guys who are going to be advising companies, advising incubators, any development you do these days, if you're not using agile methods, you know, you're really missing the boat, frankly. And, you know, we'll touch a little bit on those. We'll also touch on a number of things coming from the engineering field. And frankly, that's one where we built up an awful lot of content for a while, but then we've backed off from, in that it's, you know, it's questionable how directly relevant to business it is. Then there's Y Combinator. Who's familiar with Y Combinator? Who's heard about Y Combinator? You have. Great. Well, I'll tell you guys, this is just such an incredibly important thing. And, you know, you guys aren't unusual. Like, we had 2 out of like 15 people here, 20 people here who knows Y Combinator. Those are the kinds of numbers I see in the Valley, yet they have, in my opinion, and my opinion only right now, they have entirely transformed the entire venture capital ecosystem. What's the success rate of, let's say if you and I start a little venture now, what's the probability that we will get it to the point of, let's say, a reasonable, let's say $500,000 investment by, reasonably professional money, or success in some meaningful way? The numbers are very, very low. As far as companies getting funded by venture capital or whatever, I'd say the number is probably 1 in 10,000. In terms of even lowering the standards, etc., to the angel round, that's but a meaningful 6-figure number, let's say $500,000, the number is still at least 1 in 1,000 or something. Well, Y Combinator gets these guys, typically young guys, they work with them for 3 months, and they spend like under $20,000. They're getting like 70% funding level, 80% funding level. To me, that is a fundamental revolution that's going to change everything. And frankly, I'm amazed that the VC community isn't more troubled by it, because increasingly, hey, you're looking for deals, you go look for Y Combinator. So like they're really building this huge brand entirely on the basis of like super low cost, really focused, experimental thinking, which we're talking about here. So I hope you're getting the feeling, this idea of art of failure, that attitude of art of failure, it's not just a bunch of psycho-babble. There's really some serious, substantial, powerful tools that are being used to drive it. And quite frankly, Concepto Ventures, which we're doing, is entirely, this is the fundamental philosophy, these are the methodologies we use, and frankly, this is the joy we really get from it, because it's just, I can't tell you how much fun, how much pleasure, how much enjoyment and good feelings there is from this learning process of seeing things evolve that way. Then beyond that, there's some stuff, there's some psychological tools for self-assessment, etc., for organizational assessment that are emerging, which are really quite capable. And there's also this guy, Caldini, who's actually a professor at University of Arizona, who has, who's captured these ideas of principles of influence. And I think that's incredibly powerful. My previous company, we really did our whole marketing and sales strategy based on some of his key principles, and it was a really terrific success. And finally, last but not least, is the whole crowdsourcing theme that's emerging. That's just amazing. I mean, it's just really a beautiful phenomena in that, how many of you are familiar with crowdsourcing or have heard of crowdsourcing? Great. In your context, how did you get familiar with it?
Where you present a problem to a community or a group of people, and you kind of let the community naturally solve the problem, or it's a product, coming up with ways to add on to it, like App Store, for example, I would say.
Cool.
Crowdsourcing.
Excellent. So it's basically resources, applications, whatever, that are coming from the crowd, from the general public, and being made available to everyone else. It's really a vehicle for eliminating some middlemen. And, it can be free or it can be paid. I think paid crowdsourcing, to me, frankly, is the most powerful movement going on today. People are nervous about outsourcing. Crowdsourcing is outsourcing on steroids. I mean, it's really transformative. At the end of today, you're going to have a talk by Claire Hunsaker, who runs strategy at Samasource, which is a crowdsourcing company, and they use people in distress, refugees, etc., as a labor force. The woman that ran Samasource, I've spoken with her, she was previously with Wipro, one of the leading outsourcing companies. She believes that she can go eat their lunch using crowdsourcing. So the force that's scaring, all these companies all over the world and all these people around the world, outsourcing itself is now being targeted by I think is equally revolutionary force, if not more revolutionary. To give you a sense about the power of crowdsourcing on a personal, direct experience level, in Concepto Ventures, we easily allocate 70% of the actual work that's done within our company is done through crowdsourcing platforms. It's not done by employees, it's not done by partners, it's done at crowdsourcing platforms. And frankly, the cost of these crowdsourcing platforms is so low that frankly, on some platforms, we don't even count what we're spending on the bloody platform. It's really that cheap. What you spend is the time you have managing someone doing it. It's not the work getting done. And you know, we're building a bunch of properties using this. I spoke to a senior guy at IBM, and this will blow your mind. I mean, IBM, that's a knowledge company. You'd think that's the kind of company where you really need tight history of exchanges among people. He felt like 2/3 of IBM could be made redundant through crowdsourcing resources. So this is just enormous and huge.
Can you
Yes.
give us an example of the platforms that you use?
Sure. Odesk is an excellent one, and that's a good one for getting all kinds of programming, all kinds of, we do all kinds of programming, we do a lot of translation work using the crowdsourcing tools, we do a ton of graphic work, we do a ton of web-related work, search engine optimization work. Odesk is one of my favorites, and it's really fun. I'm going to give you an assignment to do tonight, actually, is Fiverr. Anyone know of Fiverr? Fiverr. It's basically so cool. It's a platform. It just says, what will you do for $5? And there's just hundreds of thousands of people who, it basically lets people do what they're really good at. Whatever that is. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things. I will strip and dance in a mall for you and video it and send it to you for $5. I will, frankly, for this, I like Fiverr, and for this course, I just thought, let me do some interesting experiments. I went on Fiverr and I said, I'm going to spend $50 on this course, on Art of Failure. So I went to 3 or 4 people, I gave each of them $5. Give me a logo for Art of Failure. A logo for $5 is a pretty good deal. I saw another guy, he says, I will write 5 100-word stories for you for $5. I told him, I want 5 stories about the art of failure. We have a website, by the way, artoffailure.com. You should take a look at it. I threw a couple of these things on it. I went to another guy. I want a film about the art of failure. He did a film doing the website. I went to another guy. We want the template for building the website, $5. I'm forgetting some stuff, but it gives you a sense. It's really is cool stuff. It's fun. So, global crowdsourcing, I think you get a sense that this is stuff which can make a difference. So you combine all this, and each of these, you can see how Fiverr or crowdsourcing completely feeds into this low-cost venture. Now, it's interesting to think about Silicon Valley and the concept of failure. You hear a lot of people in the Valley saying, with a lot of pride, the reason the Valley is so great is because, we embrace failure. You can fail and you're still loved. You'll get, we will fund you, blah, 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 blah. And I'll tell you, I don't believe it. I really don't believe it for a bit. I have failed. I have failed both in a corporate role, in a serious bad failure, and I've failed in an entrepreneurial role in the Valley. I did a company called LiveWall, complete bust. Probably one of the coolest things I've ever tried. When you fail in the Valley, it's hell. When you fail in the Valley, no, of course your friends return your calls, but no, a lot of people that before were begging to get into your calendar will not even take your call at this point. No, it's really, really rough. So, I don't buy it. I really don't. Here's a few of these quotes. I have not failed, I've learned 9,999 ways that won't work. Or, people don't fail, it's the plans, strategies, and tactics that fail. Just do it. which raises the question, how bad is the downside? You know, can I recover from this? Which really starts thinking about, you know, this is a simple little model I'm just going to throw out here that may be useful. Look, it's a risk continuum, and it's not just a, hey, do it or go for it. You know, there are risks which are beyond our ability to recover. And those risks are clearly risks we want to delineate and we want to explicitly avoid because we love life. And, you know, Russian roulette, even with really good odds, Russian roulette is not a game we want to play. You know, and that suggests there's really a zone in which we don't want to take risks, and you can really start communicating that from a legal perspective. I'm not going to do something which is criminally, makes me criminally liable. No matter what the value is, no matter how attractive, I don't want to go to prison. I don't want a 1 in 1,000 chance to experience that. Financially, it's really, I mean, you guys, a lot of you are MBA students, you know, there's ways of, you know, how much of your portfolio do you risk in any one event, etc. You know, and I think you should also really think about it quite clearly emotionally. You know, there's certain situations which are just emotionally fraught, and they're really difficult, maybe inappropriate for me. And even, you know, if the prize is serious, etc., you know, there are places which it's not appropriate to pursue, not to mention reputational and all. But then moving on, are there issues with too much risk reduction? You know, do we need to ban that as well? And I'd say absolutely. Frankly, in many ways, I think this is the bigger problem that we need to face, and a crowd like this needs to face, because this is really well educated, typically from, you know, nice backgrounds and, you know, reasonable educations and, you know, some wealth, etc. You know, we're so used to being good students and all. So the idea of looking like an idiot, the idea of embarrassing yourself, the idea of looking stupid isn't such an incredibly powerful force that I think this really is an issue. And if you want an example, I mean, how bad can it be? Well, what about the homebound paranoid? He is so serious and so worried about, you know, going out and, you know, events hitting him or accidents or criminals or whatever, in that, you know, this is clearly off the charts. And in reality, if you look at really the risk level, this really should be bent upwards, because at, you know, the further you go in this direction, you're actually beginning to really raise your risks. The same as investing. If you're so paranoid that you only want your money in cash, well, cash is a horrifically risky strategy today. You know, particularly if you're holding, let's say, dollar currency or whatever. So it applies more broadly, and that sort of suggests that, you know, and really what we're really talking about here in the lower end is being driven by fear of failure. And frankly, I think the fear of failure is truly the biggest problem most of the people here are likely to face. I think we all tend to be aware of the risks on this end. I think we think a lot less about the risks of this end, of being really, you know, risk averse. And I'm not a psychologist, but it's clearly one of the greatest fears. You know, it's really related to that fear of criticism or rejection, and it's really incapacitating. It's incredibly powerful how incapacitating it is. You know, here's some things about overcoming it. Frankly, this is just something I picked up on the net. It's not something I can really speak to with, you know, any deep knowledge, etc. But, you know, again, you know, going back to the comment you made, those who, maybe the unsuccessful, or there's some who look at mistakes not as outcomes or results of what happened, but as being it's them, it's permanent and personal, it's their failure, they failed, they are a failure kind of thing. You know, and it's really self-admitting. And this is really the most important point maybe I want to make. You know, failures of omission versus commission. Like when I started this, I thought about, like, what's my failure? And I've had some hugies, man, you know, really deeply embarrassing, really deeply hurting kind of failures, where, you know, you build something, it's beautiful, you love it, and then, you know, circumstance or your stupidity or bad judgment or somehow or other, it gets destroyed. You feel like failed, and now you have to recover. Those are cool. So I was telling those, but frankly, what I did was I started just asking a bunch of my friends, you know, hey, what's your biggest failure? You know, when I say failure, what comes to mind with you and stuff? And what was I expecting? I was expecting, oh man, this happened, I built this thing, it's really crashed. The theme I heard more often than not was failures of omission. It wasn't that I did something and it crashed. It was that, man, I was so battling my wife during this period. I was so messed up in home issues. You know, I really, you know, I went into, you know, safe mode at the office, you know, trying to focus on that. Well, guess what? It destroyed my damn career. I don't know if I can recover at this point under the circumstances. Or, you know, I can't tell you, I heard more stories about people feeling like they missed, you know, it was really fear of failure or missing the boat. It's these omission rather than commission failures that we have to be worried about. And so I think that bottom of the curve is really, really key to think about. And the reason is, you know, this tells you what can you roll out, you know, what can you realistically manage, and then you get a line. And the reason I think it's really important is bottom here. A clear understanding of what's acceptable from a risk perspective lets you then take bold action within those realms. You know what you can, please.
When you say failure of mission, you mean people have should have, could have, would have? Like they should have done this or they would have done something better? It's like they failed because they didn't do something?
People fail for, you know, whatever reason. You know, it could be errors they made, misjudgments they made, or it could be external forces, you know, floods come and destroy people and companies, etc. Whatever. There's some who have the mentality who will say, well, this event happened. This was a bad event for me. Now what? There's some look at it and they say, my life has ended. I'm a failure. That was the distinction, a very simple thought I was trying to communicate. I think this is, you know, the whole point is this idea of bold action, which isn't in the danger zone. Guess what? Even if this is, if you make this larger, you know, if you expand what you don't go, etc. The point is have a range where you say, look, within this range, I can really do things. You know, it's easy to look at it from a financial perspective, but it's really true emotionally and reputationally and other things. No matter what the situation is. Okay, maybe you come to the point where, no, I can't take such large risks, but I can risk $1,000. Well, when you put that down and you know, well, I have $1,000, and then you say, well, what time do I have? What relationships do I have? What skill set do I, you know, what pieces do I have? If you just look at realistically what you really have and try to be bold in terms of objectives, it's amazing what you can do. I think what happens is, you know, an awful lot of people, hi, please come on in, you know, miss the boat on this front. So this was sort of an attempt at capturing that idea, the idea of failure as a balancing act. You know, if not too much risk, you know, the homebound crazy or the Russian roulette player on the other end, that there's a manageable risk zone. And then I was suggesting, hey, maybe there's a separate emotional comfort zone as well. And if, let's say, this is what yours looks like, clearly, you know, there is an opportunity to expand the risk level that you're taking. And, you know, it's in your interest, and, you know, I guess it's really fairly obvious, the thoughts there. You know, in this case, you know, you can land in prison if you don't get your act together, because obviously what you're emotionally comfortable with is, you know, is dangerous. And frankly, the final point I wanted to make related to this is that as an entrepreneur, my goal is to start life-transforming ventures. Go for the things that can really make a substantial difference to you and to your life. but as long as you're living it, keeping it within the limits of risk that are appropriate, that you've intelligently arrived at. So this is the agenda for the next 2 days. We have the introduction today, right now, and then Dr. Blank will be presenting on customer discovery and development. I spoke about him earlier, so I think you realize the significance and the importance of this talk. And then we're going to go into a piece where where you're going to be doing a test. We're going to be testing your own personalities. And this is a test by Hogan, which is the leading company actually in that field. It's required for pilots, etc. And it's going to show you your risk, the areas of risk in terms of your person, along 11 dimensions. If you go off the deep end, which are the areas that you're likely to go off the deep end in? And hopefully that'll be a useful tool in terms of self-management. We'll then break for lunch, and then I'd like to introduce a bunch of frameworks and models of failure. These are things that come from the engineering world, in some cases, some ideas that come from the medical world, ways of dealing with failure, some coming from the aviation industry. I don't know, Checklist Manifesto. Has anyone heard of that book? It's making a lot of interesting waves, etc. Looking at a lot of these different frameworks and then trying to sum up, what does it mean to us? What does it mean to an entrepreneur or someone advising an incubator? And also, what does it mean to do so, to use these tools in an emerging country, in a frontier country? We then have a student exercise where it's really, reflecting on your own life and your own failures and the implications for you. And then we have a talk by Sashi Shimala. This is the first talk we'll have where it's someone who has, he worked in India. He built Quickies, which was the first and leading coffee shop chain in India. A very, very interesting story. And frankly, he really exemplifies this whole idea of the art of failure to me. We backed him when I ran strategy and ventures at Tandem. We made an equity investment in a company he had, Indigo Technologies, an Indian company in Chennai, which built stock exchange software. Actually, a lot of the Asian stock exchanges ran on it. And the ending of that company, we thought we were closing it down. It was a loser. Last minute, an event happened. We got an acquisition, and then the buyer's stock just went X, 20X. So this thing all of a sudden, what looked like a total disaster became this enormous success story, like absurd success story. And then he started this other coffee shop chain, and it really just scrambles the whole, what is success, what's failure, it seems like, I don't know, scrambled, to put it simply. And then we have a talk by Claire Hunsaker, who's Vice President of Strategy at Samasource. And that's the second talk, which is really relevant, which is, again, they work in refugee camps in India as well as elsewhere. And I hope that provides also some useful information and knowledge to the folks in the Frontier program. So that's the program for today. For tomorrow, we have a talk about a Y Combinator by a guy who's led a Y Combinator company, a very successful one. It was later on funded by Vinod Khosla. Then we'll have a little discussion about that and this whole idea of why do startups fail? Why do they die? Paul Graham, who founded Y Combinator, has some interesting thoughts on that topic. And then we have Ariel Poehler, who's founded more companies than anyone I know, including some fairly important ones actually here. He'll be speaking. Kana was a very solid, important company. Stumble Upon, I think it was really a phenomena. We'll have lunch. We have a number of possibilities for this. I wanted to keep it open depending on what we experience up to then. And then Simon Burrell, my partner in Madrid, will talk about concepto ventures, where we've really tied a lot of these ideas from crowdsourcing, from the customer discovery process, from etc., together, how we're really doing it in an actual venture, which we're very jazzed about. And finally, we have Kamran Elahian, who's really one of the most inspiring and amazing guys, a fellow Iranian, actually. And he's been incredibly successful. He's done like something like 9 public companies, some absurd number, you know, in terms of market cap that he's created. And then since he did that, he's got a venture fund. But he's also just done an enormous amount of philanthropic work, and including schools online, etc. So I think you'll really enjoy him. He's just he's a heck of a guy. And then I'll close it. So that's the program for the next 2 days. Welcome. I'm really looking forward to working with you and getting your feedback on how to improve it for the future. So if you'd like to break for a few minutes, we'll set up and Steve will do his pitch.